So it's great to see you all. It's weird that this time last year, a lot of us were in Des Moines, and now we are all joining you from our homes here in Washington, D.C. So I'm Sarah Dirks, the Executive Director of Industry Relations at American Farm Bureau Federation. And I'm joined by my colleague, Andrew Walmsley, who's our Director of Congressional Relations, and David Hong, who's the Director of Government Affairs at the Farm Journal Foundation. So as I just mentioned, today we're all joining you from our homes here in Washington, D.C., where we work. And we're so happy to talk with you all about where policy intersects with the science and the issues that are being discussed this week at the World Food Prize and the Borlaug Dialogue. Joining us today, we're going to have a message from U.S. Congressman Anthony Brindisi, and also a special guest later on, Stephanie McBeth, who's a congressional staffer. And she's going to share a bit about her passion for our food system and a few tips for how you can most effectively communicate issues that are important to you with your lawmakers. A few ground rules. Our discussion today is going to be really informal. We encourage you to ask questions throughout in the Q&A or in the chat. And we are also going to be posting notes that support our discussion throughout. And we will also be emailing these all out to the attendees afterwards. So there'll be a lot of links. Feel free to click through while you're listening to us as we go, and then we'll also send those out afterwards. One other thing we're going to be doing is we have a few polls to get you guys engaged and to hear from you, since we can't see you live in person. And so we'll be doing a couple polls throughout. So as I mentioned, we're going to be discussing U.S. policies that impact global food security and that interject with our ability as a global food system to achieve equity, social and environmental sustainability, and improve global nutrition. So as I mentioned, we're going to be doing a few polls today. So to get us started, we thought we would start by talking about your knowledge on some of these issues before we talk about the need to inform our policymakers. So for those of you that are on so far, I want you first to answer our first poll. So this is a quiz. In the past 10 years, for both of these questions, which country has not increased their investment in public ag research? Brazil, China, India, or the US? And then also in the past 10 years, which of those 4 countries has invested twice as much in public sector ag R&D than the others? So go ahead, fill that out. Oh, as a panelist, we can't vote, so we have to see your answers. We will give you a second to do that. All right, let's see if we have results of what you guys selected. So, past 10 years, which country has not increased their investment, and then who has invested twice as much as the others listed? All right, so those of you who selected the United States for the first question, you are correct. And it looks like we have some really informed folks on here. So for the second question, you are also correct. I'm just going to pause for a second. David, would you like to elaborate on this a little bit?
Sure, Sarah. Really just the trends that we've seen over the last couple of decades. The US's funding for ag research, for public ag research, has been relatively constant and hasn't really moved. Private ag research has increased a lot, but that's really focused on just a handful of crops, a handful of livestock. And so the public ag research is sort of the stuff that benefits everyone. And that's something that, as the U.S. wants to maintain its kind of edge and its leadership in ag, we'd like to increase that funding moving forward to keep pace with our competitors. So back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, David. Okay, guys, one more and then we'll get rolling here. These next 3 questions are all true or false. Let us know what you think. The first one, agriculture accounts for less than 10% of total US greenhouse gas emissions, which is far less than transportation, electricity generation, and industry sectors. Number 2, US agriculture would have needed nearly 100 million acres in 1990 to match 2018 production levels. And the third true or false, thanks to ag research advancements, since 1990, methane emissions per unit of livestock production in beef has declined by 8%, in pork has declined by 18%, and in milk has declined by 25%. All right, what do you guys think? All right, let's see what our responses are. Oh, pretty good here. Let's see. So the answers to all of these are true. Andrew, do you have any additional thoughts you'd like to share with the group to embellish these 3 facts that we just shared?
Yeah, we've got a pretty sharp group today, Sarah, so I don't think we're going to be able to trip them up. No, that's right. All 3 of those questions were true. You know, you look back at roughly 2 generations in American agriculture, we've been able to increase our outputs by over 270%, while our inputs have remained relatively flat. So what that says is we're producing more with less, which is really a credible story. It's attributable to many things, but I would argue that, you know, innovation and some of the things we're going to talk about today has played a key role. It's that public agricultural research and then that key component of extension as well to get it into farmers' hands, to adopt new practices, to do things with precision agriculture, to make sure we've got the best traits available for our animals and for our crops. And so we've seen incredible gains in agriculture and sustainability by, you know, globally, greenhouse gas emissions are closer to 25%, whereas US we're below 10%. So once again, an incredible story, but something that, you know, David hit on. We got to make sure we're not falling behind in innovation, making sure we're getting the tools in the hands of farmers that need them.
Thank you so much, Andrew. All right, thank you all for participating in our first couple of polls. So we're going to start out with a message from Congressman Brindisi. Unfortunately, he was unable to join us live as he had an obligation today, but as he's such a strong supporter and he's very passionate about ag research, he sent us a message that he wanted to share. So we will play that for you now. Oh, it sounds like we're having issues with the volume, so we might need to unmute. Hold on, try that one more time.
Hi, everyone. I'm Congressman Anthony Brindisi, and I'm proud to represent New York's 22nd District in the House of Representatives and sit on the House Agriculture Committee. In my district alone, dairy farming is responsible for more than 9,000 jobs and $1.7 billion in direct economic impact, and I'm working every day to ensure upstate farmers and producers have the support they need to succeed. Since coming to Congress, I've worked with Democrats and Republicans to cut red tape and get results for our farmers. I helped pass the Bipartisan Farm Workforce Modernization Act through the House to help our local farm labor shortage so upstate farmers can hire more workers. In my district, we've seen firsthand the power of investing in ag research and development, and that's why I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of the America Grows Act. Domestic ag research has declined over the years, and the America Grows Act would restore our country's commitment to science-based agriculture innovation, empower our farmers to develop new ag technology, and ensure we can compete in the global marketplace. Our bill has the support from Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate, and I'll keep working to get it signed into law. When the pandemic hit New York State, I worked with members of both parties to send direct aid to small farms and expand access to federal assistance to apple growers. In April, I helped lead the charge to make sure small farms were eligible for critical economic injury disaster loans so they could stay afloat and continue to feed our communities. There is so much more to be done to get through these difficult times, but I will be there to support our farmers every step of the way. We're all in this together, and by looking out for our communities and being active citizens, we will come out of this chapter stronger than ever. Thank you to the Farm Journal Foundation and the American Farm Bureau Federation for including me in your event today. And thank you to all of you for supporting our farmers.
Well, thank you to Congressman Brindisi, and I know he couldn't be here, but we are going to be sharing this with him. So we greatly appreciate that and greatly appreciate your ongoing support of ag research and specifically the America Grows Act. All right, let's dive right into some of the policies that the Congressman referenced, which impact topics that are being discussed this week at the Borlaug Dialogue. I'm going to pass things to David to give us a rundown of what's going on here in Washington.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks again to Congressman Brindisi, who represents upstate, or I guess you guys call it Central New York. Anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of what we're pushing for. And I'm going to throw a few technical terms out there, at least in our world, and so just bear with me. I'll try to define them as we go. But just kind of stepping back a little bit, we are in the 116th Congress, so every 2 years after, or every year after an election, the next 2 years is a Congress, and so we're at the tail end of this one. Just to give you a sense of what Congress does, legislative business accounts for about 20,000 bills that have been introduced in this session, which is a lot of bills. As you can probably guess, not all of them are going to pass into law. In fact, only a handful are really going to sweep through. But generally, there's two types of legislation that we focus on as advocates. And I mean by advocates, not just the organizations that are on this call, but all of you as well. The first is something we call authorizing legislation, and the second is appropriations. So on authorizing legislation, the vast majority of bills that you'll see are authorizing, and self-evident. They authorize Congress to do something, whether it's introduce a new program or modify an existing program. The vast majority of those bills are considered this category. The second category is appropriations. And appropriations is where Congress appropriates or takes money from the U.S. Treasury to pay for XYZ program. So each year, Congress has the charge and the responsibility to pay for part of the federal budget through the appropriations process. So again, big picture, we spend about $4 trillion a year as a U.S. federal government. Only about 30% of that is discretionary or at the discretion of Congress. Most of it, the other part of that budget is funds things like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, which are considered mandatory funding. But that 30% of that budget is a little over $1 trillion, depending on the year. So that's quite a bit of money. And this means that it's also an opportunity for us as advocates to, write to our members of Congress and to communicate with them how important some of the programs that money is funding. So, for example, ag research is funded through discretionary funding, and also importantly is global food security. If we look at the different bills, and this will, I think Sarah will drop some of this information in the chat box. There are currently a few different bills that merit attention. The first one I'll just touch upon, Congressman Brindisi also discussed, is the America Grows Act. The America Grows Act is a authorizing bill, so it's in that category of where most of the bills are. And it was introduced last year, 2019. It increases the authorization for ag research by 5% over the next 5 years. So that doesn't sound, like a lot. It sounds modest, but if you actually add it up, it's almost $900 million for ag research, which would be a massive increase to where we are currently. This bill has bipartisan support both in the House and the Senate. The bill numbers are also there. I think the Senate one is S-2458 and the House is H.R. 4714. So the ask to your member of Congress would simply be, hey, if you're not a co-sponsor on this bill already, would you consider co-sponsoring? And even though we only have a few months left in the year before the next Congress, we hope that in the 117th, we'll be able to reintroduce this bill, hopefully with many more co-sponsors, because folks have kind of been hearing about it for the past year or so. The next bill I'll talk about is a resolution. It's the Feed the Future resolution. It's the FTF acronym. Feed the Future is a program that is celebrating its 10th year. It's the U.S. government's official global food security and nutrition initiative / strategy. It's gone through a few different iterations over time, but basically it has had tremendous results in the past 10 years. There are 23 million people who are no longer in poverty because of this program. 3.4 million children have avoided stunting. And it really is a program that has had a lot of impact for not a lot of money. It's only about $1 billion appropriated to this program per year, which is a pretty small percentage of the foreign affairs budget. So anyway, we would ask that folks continue to co-sponsor this resolution. A resolution is simply something in this context saying that, hey, we're celebrating this program. We think it's really great. We want to continue investing in this program because we think it makes a big difference for a lot of people. And a lot of those people that are no longer in poverty are small-scale farmers. The last two that I'll bring up are more further afield. So it's not necessarily something we're talking about today, but it's something that should be on your radar in the next couple of years. One is the Global Food Security Act reauthorization. So that bill that was passed into law, that is the bill that basically authorizes Feed the Future, that initiative. That Global Food Security Act is up again in 2023. So I know it's 2020 still, but 2021 is right around the corner. So we're already starting to think about how to set those up and tee those up for folks. We do believe the Global Food Security Act should be updated to reflect a lot of the changes. The world has changed tremendously in the last 10 years, especially for those living in poverty and hunger. And, you know, with COVID-19, with, you know, conflict and with some of the famines that are ongoing, many things have changed. And so our approach, I think, as a government should change as well. So something we're looking into. And the other thing, the last thing I'll mention, and Andrew can probably elaborate on this much more, is the Farm Bill. As many of you have heard of this, the Farm Bill is the main authorizing legislation for all things agriculture policy and farm policy in the United States. It's been going on for a very long time at this point. But the next Farm Bill is due up in 2023 as well. And so the Farm Bill also funds I think it's about $3 billion, maybe it's a little bit less than $2.5 billion of food aid through lots of different programs, including Food for Peace and McGovern-Dole. Those programs help provide food and emergency assistance to places that are experiencing conflict, places where farmers are unable to farm productively because of all kinds of reasons. And so that's a really important part of the Farm Bill as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Andrew.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I'll just expand a little bit on the Farm Bill just so folks are familiar with it. You hear it, you know, every couple of years. It's a 5-year, typically, reauthorization. And in addition to the programs David described, I mean, there's so many different titles of the Farm Bill that impact rural communities, urban communities, and obviously the agriculture sector. You look at nutrition programs, which is a huge spending portion of the Farm Bill, but it also has a lot of the programs that farmers utilize for conservation programs. So once again, back to the idea of sustainability, there's an energy title where a lot of our renewable energy programs are housed from USDA. And then there's a research title. So Farm Bill is a big piece of legislation that a lot of the ag community focuses on. It's an authorizing bill, once again, that comes around every 5 years or so. But one that you should pay attention to, especially as you care about these issues that we're raising today.
Thank you so much, Andrew and David. Let's see, we have one question from the chat. Someone asks if, can expanded research across these different disciplines deliver more multiple benefit solutions? David, I'm going to pass that to you. And I think it's a pretty broad question, so I don't know if AG has a more specific question, but it sounds like it's a yes. But David, can you embellish a little bit more about the broad ag research investment?
Well, AG, as someone who used to be the Secretary of Agriculture for the state of California, I'm sure understands a lot of the issues here. But thanks for the question, AG. It's a good one. I think the problem in our world, is in many other worlds, is that everyone is siloed to an extent, and we sort of stick to, you know, the echo chambers that we're familiar with. You know, we're funded by some of the same organizations, or we advocate with the same organizations. And so what, you know, if we're really looking at the SDGs, which are, you know, idealistic to be sure, I think we have to start breaking down silos and divisions between, you know, the ag people, the health people, national security people. I think the U.S. government is trying to do that at certain levels. I know Feed the Future and the at the USAID, the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, newly named, is really trying to incorporate folks from, this is another acronym, WASH, water and sanitation, from health, from energy, from lots of different areas. Because, if you're a small scale farmer in the developing world, you're not just thinking about food security, you're thinking about energy access, you're thinking about local and community health, you're thinking about water and sanitation issues. You're dealing with multiple issues. And if those groups and stakeholders don't talk to each other, if they don't communicate, if they don't work together, then you're going to have lots of challenges that will continue to happen. So it's not an answer that I think is satisfactory, but it's something that I think we have to be really cognizant of and willing to break down some of those barriers so that these different communities and stakeholders can work together.
And Sarah, I'll just add a little bit, AG, yes, as former Secretary of Ag, and then also I know he's done a lot of work continuing around climate, around energy, and a lot of international work. Appreciate all the work that you do. I mean, that's where I think ag research is so important. I mean, farmers have so many different challenges before them, but they can provide so many different solutions to most of the issues that you described. But we've got to have, that research and extension to get the science into their hands, to help them weather the storms that they're facing. I mean, you look at economic conditions across most of U.S. ag, they're struggling as we try to also do more international aid as well. So the more interdisciplinary we can get, as society puts more pressure on farmers to provide additional societal benefits, we need all the partners we can find, and that's the research community. That's folks from across the aisle that we maybe traditionally haven't worked with in the past. That to achieve these goals, we need all the help we can get.
Thank you both, and thank you for these great questions. Let's take one more question before we keep moving, and I'm going to pose this to Andrew. Cynthia asks, can any of the panelists define the difference between sustainable agriculture and regenerative agriculture? Major food processing companies appear to be transitioning their policies from one to the other. One thing before Andrew jumps in, I'll note that what David was just getting at, and Andrew, and leading into this question, is a lot of coalition building in town, and we're seeing a lot of that happen. That's part of the reason that we are working together with Farm Journal, and we have been engaging in these conversations. We're working with a lot of alternative partners across various sectors where we all have a unified interest in these topics. And so I'll pass it to Andrew to talk about sustainable versus regenerative before we keep going.
I don't know if I'm the best for this. I'm not very good for being politically correct. That's the danger for Sarah for putting me on these panels. We can't even agree what sustainable means, right? I mean, there's so many different definitions that are out there. I would argue regenerative seems to be one of the latest buzzwords in the food industry. For a farmer, I think they're in their mind, everything they've been doing, especially on a multi-generation farm that might be around, could be a century farm. That's probably a pretty sustainable farm in their minds. But as we alluded to, there's more and more pressure putting on ag producers to continue to perform and provide additional benefits. I think a good definition for sustainable goes back to the 1990 Farm Bill. If anybody get bored and wants to Google and look up what that definition is, I think that's a fair example. Regenerative I don't know of anywhere in the government where that's been defined. I think the idea is that you're building up soil, you're regenerating what you're taking away on the farm. I think as farmers learn the science and the research gets in their hands, that's what they try to do on a regular basis, is to leave that farm in a better place than they received it from their parents and all the sacrifices that they undertook. So I think either way, regenerative or at least definitely sustainable, you got to have economic viability mixed in there somewhere, because that farmer is not going to be able to implement those practices or pass it on to the next generation if they're not be able to have some profitability. So I just gave you a Washington, D.C. answer. I didn't answer your question, but hopefully that will get us moving in the presentation.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Andrew is our one lobbyist on here today, so he's really good at that. But that's excellent. And I would just add, it's interesting. A few years ago, we had a major food company, a major brand, reach out to us because they had just seen the use of, I think, one of their competitors beginning to tout regenerative ag. And they were concerned that there's no real definition of that, whether just in the industry or, there's no regulation around that. And so we started to have these conversations. It does, as Andrew said, it seems more about soil health. And Andrew said it very eloquently about replacing, what you're taking away. But there are no hard definitions, but what we have seen, and we can say at least from where we sit in Washington, is the supply chain is talking, and that's really reassuring. We're seeing that here from the input companies that are working with us and the growers all the way up to the buyers down the line. And we're seeing this both in the US and globally, which is going to be key to us as we're all working together as part of this global food system. So thank you, Andrew and David, for that initial overview. We'll have more time at the end to dive into specific policy questions if people want to dig in there. But let's transition a little bit into how you can get involved. Both of you have kind of gave us a teaser of where we need to use our voice. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Andrew, can I pitch it back to you to help tee us up as we kind of start this conversation, since it's your job professionally as a lobbyist to help amplify Farm Bureau members' voices, but help us tell a little bit about your role with the organization, and then we'll talk about how you as an individual can get involved, whether or not you're a member of an organization.
Thanks, Sarah. My clock's going off at the wrong time, so I apologize for the background noise. I figured it's just better to talk through it than sit in there and stare at you for the last 5 seconds that it dings there. It always seems to happen like this. So apologize, y'all. No, you're absolutely right, Sarah. Our constitutional republic is a complicated thing, right? It's not supposed to move quickly. That's how the founders designed it. Just for a refresher on a kind of congressional federal government 101, there is 2 chambers in Congress, the House and the Senate. The spending bill's got to start in the House. You've got the authorizing bills that we talked about. Each bill has to pass the chamber and be sent to the other chamber to be taken up. So sometimes you've got a traditional process which goes through the committee, has to be marked up, voted on by the committee, and then goes to the floor. We might not have been following that as closely these days, just as Congress has maybe become a little bit more dysfunctional. But at the end of the day, a bill has to get both through the House and the Senate, and then the president has to sign it into law. He can also veto it if he doesn't agree with it, and it can go back to the Congress and then be debated again. The other aspect that just to keep you aware of is once that bill is passed and signed into law by the president, there's usually a whole other process that comes with it. And that's where the administrative state comes in. That's where your agencies and your regulatory folks, your bureaucrats in a lot of ways, start implementing what Congress has passed. And so there's also a process there where you can provide public comment and things you've got to pay attention to. So, hey, if we're getting all these great research dollars and it's starting to flow out to our public universities, but we have some outdated regulations, particularly maybe around innovation, that's holding back that research from getting off the shelf in a lab out into the field and into the farmer's hands. We got to be able to address that. And so sometimes you've got to advocate through that regulatory process. So just saying high level, there's a lot of moving pieces. Not to say that as an individual, you can't navigate it yourself. You absolutely can. But I would bet that even if, ag research or sustainability isn't your number one issue, but you have a passion about something else, I'm sure there's an advocacy group you can join. Stephanie could probably elaborate on all the random, issues that come before a congressional office. But it's just important to realize that there is a group out there for you. We're hoping that you're passionate about these issues. Farm Journal, Farm Bureau, obviously. Farm Bureau is a membership organization. We welcome all types of members, from active farmers and ranchers to just folks that are supporters of American agriculture. You have folks like me that advocate on a regular basis, but we also have advocacy tools that you'll be sent. And a lot of any effective organization will have those. So it's important to be involved in something, but it's also important to be knowledgeable yourself. And I know we'll probably talk about this a little bit more, but you can contact your member of Congress yourself. There's resources that are out there. And being involved at the local level is also key, being seen back in the district. So it is a lot to bite off, but you can manage it, and being engaged is what's so important to keep those folks straight in Washington. And heck, it's your constitutional right. It's right there in the First Amendment to redress grievances with Congress.
Thank you so much, Andrew. We really should have had another, instead of a poll, we should have a quiz here now, but we'll spare you guys. Andrew, can you just remind some of us how our policymakers learn what legislation to introduce, or how do they learn how to appropriate dollars? How do they become informed of what issues are important to their various constituents?
Yeah, so a lot of times it's roles like Farm Bureau, organizations like Farm Bureau is its role to help navigate and work with legislators. They listen to folks that have the ear of the farmer. but it's also that individual contacting that office. I mean, it takes all kinds. There's so many different opportunities to plug in, from going to a town hall, to visiting with your member of Congress, to working with their staff. You start building those key relationships early on, and who knows where it'll take you. I mean, that's what's so important, is if you have access to an office and you build your credibility with them, you have a lot of influence on what that member will hopefully do in the future that's beneficial for their constituents and the districts they represent.
Thank you, Andrew. That's great. Now, I know one of the main ways that constituents can engage with their members of Congress, or whether on their own or through an organization, is meeting in person. A lot of people don't know that anyone can typically walk right into the Capitol building and go in and see your member's office. But currently, I know their offices are closed. And so we're encouraging folks to, still engage on social media. A fun fact, now over 95% of representatives are on Twitter, over 90% are on Facebook. It's actually more shocking that it's not 100%. Hopefully that will be soon, but we're all getting better at adapting on how to engage virtually. We're seeing members that are recording video and sharing that on social, or emailing that in, and people are getting more and more creative. For folks that are on here that are actual farmers, we've been seeing more and more farmers that typically might invite their member of Congress to visit when they're home, to record a virtual farm tour, or researchers at universities or students to record that video message, because studies have shown that that in-face personal story and that personal connection is really what resonates and is what helps them advocate for your needs. David or Andrew, anything else to add there?
I did see a question come in who was asking about how folks can get involved, especially young people, outside of the Beltway, which I think is a really good question, because, I mean, that's where quote unquote real America is, right? But there's a lot of different ways to do that. I think if you're at a university and an institution already, that's a great way to get plugged in, because there are student groups. Obviously, you have access to faculty and administration, and the administration at your school that can help. I wouldn't say most schools, but a lot of schools, especially land grants, have their own government affairs offices. They have government relations people that usually have worked on the Hill or worked in the administration. It'd be a great way for students to get involved there. So students seem to have an embarrassment of riches in terms of opportunities. For people who are not in school anymore, who are working or not working, or doing all kinds of things during COVID, another way to get involved, I think, would just be to reach out and get to know your member of Congress. They have field offices in your district. And so Sarah's going to walk us through an exercise later where we'll identify who that person is if you don't already know. But again, you can request meetings. You can meet with them. Obviously, face-to-face is difficult now, but post-COVID times, I'm sure that's possible. And there's all types of events too. A few organizations I'll just name drop that do a lot of things locally are one, and this is more on the foreign affairs side, not necessarily agriculture, but I would take a look at the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. I'll drop a link in the chat box. USGLC does a lot of work in terms of building up support for diplomacy, for development, again, which is addressing the global hunger issues. And then the other organization that I've heard of and I've seen out in the field, out in the rest of the country, is an organization called World Trade Center. And they have a bunch of different chapters in local cities that, again, are sort of more of an international affairs interest, but really try to organize people that are interested in these issues to kind of organize together at a more local level in the district. So I'll stop there, and Andrew has anything to jump in.
Yeah, I completely agree with David. I mean, once again, putting a plug in for Farm Bureau, most of our land-grant universities have a collegiate Farm Bureau chapter that you can get involved with that typically links you up with your state Farm Bureau. Once again, if you're out of college, there's county Farm Bureaus, but every member of Congress does have a website, and you can find a lot of the information on that. Their district staff, their district offices. And right now, with the kind of COVID world we're in, Washington, D.C. visits aren't happening. People aren't doing actual fly-ins. There's a lot of the virtual, and obviously social media and stuff makes an impact. But I would still say the most important thing is personal relationships and that actual touch of a real person. So reaching out to those district offices or attending a town hall. Once again, if you're a farmer, inviting your member of Congress to come out and visit your farm and see what's really happening. I think, they look for those opportunities You can write, a letter to the editor, congratulating your congressman if they've done something for you. Any of that press is always welcome. So just to give you an example, I think Sarah's pulled up here how you can find who your representative is in case you don't know. We'll do mine. My zip code is 22405. I'm just a little bit outside of Washington and Virginia. Representative Whitman is mine. He has a fairly large district. This is the boyhood home of George Washington, Ferry Farms, a rock's throw from my house. That's where George Washington grew up. We also, James Monroe, also is part of this district, just a little bit further east in Montrose. So pretty cool district. Got a lot of military. So you see that on his website. But here are some of the resources that a member of Congress has. Each website's maybe a little bit different. They're not uniform. I don't know how the House sets the IT up, but you can find this information. And so, when you would traditionally want to visit Washington, you don't necessarily just want to walk into an office. I don't think the reception's that warm, but if you do give them a little bit of heads up that you're going to be in town, you work with their scheduler, most likely you'll be able to meet with that actual member of Congress when you're there under normal times. But there you got information. You can sign up for their emails. They really want you to sign up for their emails because then they can interact with you. I get invited to town halls, with Representative Whitman pretty regularly. He shows up at our church to check in with folks. So, every member of Congress does it a little bit different, but the basic resources are out there for you to connect. And so you can obviously work through your representative. They are closer to the people. You also got your 2 senators as well. Don't forget them. They also play an important role, but your representative is a little bit more focused on the district, and usually a better opportunity is the People's House. But don't forget about your senators as well.
Thank you so much, Andrew and David. And we'll be posting links in the chat, but again, you can go to house.gov or you can go look up your senator as well, and we will share all of that. So both of you teed up our guest perfectly. And before we introduce Stephanie, we're going to do one more poll, and then we will keep going on. Okay, so our next poll, we want to know how many of you honestly know who your member of Congress is, or hopefully if you don't know, you'll go to house.gov and look them up, or how many of you did know before, maybe you just went on and followed us and looked them up. Also, if you know who your member is, have you ever contacted your representative? And then if so, how did you contact them? So we are just curious to see the level of engagement of the folks that are on here, and don't be bashful, be honest. All right, let's see what everyone said. All right, we had 78% who knew who their member was. And it's about 50-50 who have ever contacted their representative. That's great.
I don't believe it, Sarah. So if you ever intern with me, one of the questions you get is, do you know who your member of Congress is? And it's not nowhere near 78%.
Well, hopefully everyone was just following along and they typed in their zip code and they learned. So thank you guys. That's a lot of fun. And we encourage you, if you haven't, to please do so. So to help talk us through some of that, I'm now going to introduce a really special guest who we have joining us today is Stephanie Macbeth. And Stephanie is a legislative aide and press assistant in the U.S. House of Representatives for New York's 21st Congressional District. And she handles a diverse portfolio of ag and environmental legislative issues. Stephanie grew up in upstate New York, where her extended family owns and operates a dairy farm. She graduated from Cornell University with a degree of animal science, where she was an active member of the Collegiate Farm Bureau, the Agriculture Future of America, and was Cornell's student advocate for their Council on Agricultural Research, Extension, and Teaching. Last year, Stephanie was also chosen as one of the 100 global delegates to participate in the Bayer Youth Ag Summit in Brazil, where she was able to learn more about ag innovation and global progress towards the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today. Everything that we've been talking about is really relevant to your journey, both from being such an engaged student advocate. Can you tell us a little bit about what got you involved in college and then what led you to pursue the career that you have today?
Sure. Well, thank you so much to American Farm Bureau and Farm Journal Foundation for having me. I, as Sarah said, grew up in upstate New York in a very agricultural community, a very rural area, and kind of developed a passion for ag throughout my childhood through things like 4-H and FFA and other activities. carried that through to my experience at Cornell and realized very quickly how important advocacy was, just on the campus level, to talk to people about what farmers do, but also to be engaged with people who make decisions about things that happened on campus, whether it was research funding for programs that we were really passionate about, or, you know, opportunities for students. And I think activities like you know, the advocacy that we do through Collegiate Farm Bureau, or the lobbying that I did with the College of Ag and Life Sciences here in DC to talk about the impacts of that funding towards the activities that we participated in as students, the long-term impacts of that, just not even at the state level, but also, you know, internationally when it comes to research and the engagement that we all have. I guess I'm a firm believer that policy drives change. But since I've come to Washington, I've learned that it's the opposite too. Change really does drive policy. And I think that that interaction is really important. And I think also one of the things that I've learned over the last few years is that many legislators, especially those who don't represent particularly rural districts or districts with a prominent agricultural presence in industry, have sometimes a difficult time understanding, you know, what the rest of the world is like. And I think we see that in the state of New York. We have a really unique experience where when I started lobbying with Farm Bureau, even at the state level, a lot of the representatives were from downstate New York. And we had to remind them that their food was grown in upstate New York. And these are the issues that are important. And this is how that impacts your food and the people in your district. And that's the same at the federal level. You know, my boss obviously represents a really large agricultural sector, but we also work with members of Congress who don't. And to me, that conversation is really important. And I'm able to use what I know about ag from my experiences to have conversations with other staff, even who are in my position, about why these things matter. One thing I will mention that it stuck with me when I was in college, I remember hearing Dr. Frank Mittlener speak. And he's one of my favorite scientists and favorite, you know, speakers just in the space of animal science and other places. But he was able to have an interaction with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just virtually via social media after she was talking about the Green New Deal and agriculture. And maybe, you know, coming from the Bronx, she doesn't have the best agricultural experience when it comes to science and such, but Dr. Mittlener was able to communicate to her why these things matter and what the impacts are and what the stats actually are. And I think that is a fantastic example of how advocacy really does drive change.
Stephanie, that's outstanding. Can you tell us a little bit about how you chose your career path?
Sure. So I knew I wanted to be involved in ag and I wanted to work with farmers, and I do that every day, which is a fantastic part of my job. But I also really liked the law and I really like policy. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity every day. You know, as Andrew said, Congress is the greatest deliberative body, and it's tough sometimes to keep your patience when you really want to see things happen very quickly, but there's so many moving parts. And I think coming to Washington really was just a culmination of my experience in lobbying with Farm Bureau, my experience being a student advocate, and just kind of tying all those things together. And I'm fortunate to be able to work for the district that I grew up in. And that's a really unique scenario. I'm working with farmers and stakeholders and other folks that I have known for my entire life. Some of them are related to me. And I think the opportunity to be able to bring their needs to Washington and raise them with my boss, or make voting recommendations, or have her co-sponsor bills or lead efforts through letters. That's really why I'm here. I'm here to work on behalf of the people of our district, specifically the farmers and those who produce food. And it's also really interesting to be able to work with offices like Congressman Brindisi's office, who have great staffers, but might not be as familiar with the impact, the direct impact that some of this has on upstate New York in general, or any other region. So I think it's really just, I love being able to work with ag and for ag in a way, but also, you know, have the resources here in Washington to be able to communicate to people at home what's going on, and to encourage them to be engaged, much like we're encouraging all of you to be engaged today, because it is so incredibly important to do that.
Thank you, Stephanie. And, you know, a fun fact, a lot of people might not know that a lot of the congressional offices are people from those areas, and maybe not the exact district, but they're nearby. And I've never worked on the Hill, but I did intern on the Hill in college. And I remember as an intern, you do a lot of photocopying, and I would get local clips from home, and it's funny how something that our nation's capital may seem really far away or distant or disconnected, but it's a lot of little small towns and people representing those that are all here together. And I know that we have a lot of students on today, so if any of you are like Stephanie, who are really passionate about these issues, but maybe you're not in a science-based field, but you care about this, and you're thinking about communication or advocacy, think about Jobs on the Hill. Come on down, and we need more people like Stephanie and David and Andrew and myself to help tell our story here in Washington. So Stephanie, help give us a little bit of an inside scoop as staff. So how do you guys learn what's on your constituents' minds? How do you stay informed? And then specifically, since March, since everything's shut down and it looks a little different with COVID, how are you staying abreast, or what tips do you have for people of how they can connect with you?
Sure. Our office was one of the first offices on the Hill to actually close down, and it was during a really tough time. We were just finishing the appropriations process, like you guys were talking about earlier, and it became really difficult sometimes to communicate with our constituents, but we figured it out. But in a normal year, we obviously have a lot of fly-ins. We always have people coming into the office, like you said, scheduling time with the Congresswoman or scheduling time with us as staff to sit down and talk about their experiences and why these things are important to them, and then make that ask of, this is the specific line of funding that we need support for, this is the way that we feel the Congresswoman should vote, or this is a bill that we'd really like her to co-sponsor because it's important to people in the district. But it all starts with our constituents. We have 3 district offices located in our upstate New York region. We have staff there that meet with local stakeholders, constituents, local elected officials every single week to talk about issues that are important to them. They communicate all of that back to our staff here in DC. We also have direct contact with constituents through phone calls and emails that come through from them all the time, asking for specific things. Sometimes we have people who call every day. They're very passionate about what they're asking for. But we also do a lot of outreach via social media. I mean, Twitter is so important in DC, and sometimes you do have to step outside of the bubble and realize that it's not always reflective of what's going on at home, but we do really try to stay in touch with constituents and let them know how the Congresswoman voted, what she's co-sponsoring, what she's working on in committee. And that's really important interaction to have as well. We have a newsletter that we send out every week. So it's a lot of back and forth, and specifically during COVID, we've done a lot of Zoom meetings with constituents, and just like this, we've had the Congresswoman. She's done a lot of them. She's had committee hearings via Zoom. It's a little bit difficult for some of the older members of Congress. Sometimes it's been interesting to watch them adjust to all of this, but same with the staff. We just had to adapt and get creative. But at the end of the day, these issues are so important that constituents are still finding ways to reach out to us, and we are still being very receptive to them. So yeah, it's a unique time, as it is for everyone, but at the end of the day, the work of Congress still has to continue, and we've found ways to make it work.
So if I go online and I email my Congresswoman, or I go the contact us box, you guys read all of those? All
of them. We have one designated staffer, the poor guy, whose job is to sort through all of that mail and figure out whose issue area it belongs to so that we can respond to them. I also think there's, other ways. A lot of constituents and farmers in my district have my phone number, and they will call me, or they will call the Congresswoman all the time and let her know what's going on. And it's also the job of staff. And because I work on the press side, I see a lot of this too. So it's our job to stay afloat as to what's going on in the news at home, what's happening, what's important to people. We have very close proximity to the Canadian border in our district, so we pay attention to what's going on in Canada. There's a lot of things that we have to kind of stay up to date with. But yes, there is always a response. We always answer constituents, whether it's difficult or easy. And we always encourage them to reach out to us directly because we want to hear from them. That's our job. And the Congresswoman is very, very much an advocate for helping constituents with casework, whether that's, veterans benefits, Social Security benefits. A lot of people had some difficulties receiving their stimulus checks when that stimulus package came out. So we have learned very much this last 6 months, especially, that constituent casework is so important, and we really take that seriously.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's great. So do we have any questions for Stephanie right now? If not, she can probably stick around until the end. We're almost done here. I don't see any coming through right at this moment. But Stephanie, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of an insider look into what it's like to be a staffer, and to remind folks that your representatives do work for you, and don't forget that. And so do their staff. So thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you.
So a big part, as she mentioned, is social media and how we engage. And so would love to get everyone involved here. It looks like we still have a pretty big size group to help raise our voices around what you care about this week at the World Food Prize Dialogue. So I'm going to go on Twitter and craft a tweet. Feel free, if you'd like, you could tweet at your representative. If you look them up at house.gov and you get their handle, you could just tweet something generic. If you don't have Twitter, feel free to post something on Facebook or even send an email. And if you're thinking of some ideas of what to tweet, you can retweet what I'm about to post, or you could go back to something you learned today or something that you're really passionate about here this week. So let's see if I can remember how to share my screen. Second. And you are all more than welcome to follow me on Twitter. Let's see here. Hold on. Let's try this one more time. There we go. All right, guys. So pull up your phones. I'm going to tweet from my computer so you can see it. You are all more than welcome to follow me. My Twitter handle is at sbrown97. See some apple blossoms in the background. Apples are my favorite grown product here at home. So let's see. All right. What did we cover today? So I'm just going to tweet something generic. So I'm not going to tweet it at anyone specifically. I'm going to talk about just in general why we're here. So and while you're tweeting, make sure, I'm going to pause, make sure you use the World Food Prize hashtag, which we will put in the comment box. It's hashtag foodprize20. And then for this, if you want to add an additional hashtag, do hashtag advocate WFP20, and we can see how many of you did that. And the World Food Prize has been retweeting a lot of tweets that they see, so you can also add them. So let me see here. I'm going to actually write a coherent sentence, and I hope that you are joining me. And again, if you want, you can just retweet me. So let's see, investment agriculture research is, while you're all watching me, we'll see if I have any typos.
Hey, well, Sarah tweets this out. Stephanie, I have a question for you. So for folks who are interested in working on the Hill or interning or just coming down to DC, what is the internship situation for most offices now going into, COVID-19 and everything?
I think it's very dependent on the office. There are some offices, we've started kind of a hybrid back into the office by group type of situation. We have had interns coming in and out. In a normal year, I started out as an intern actually in my same office when I was in college, and that process is easy. You can actually go right to the website of your representative, and all of those websites look generally the same, but there's usually a tab that you can apply for internships right online, and that goes through to the Washington office. I know that some offices are doing virtual interns. We had a few of those this spring that were still in college, but obviously doing online class and still found time to intern on the side. So that's an option for some people, but some offices are doing in-person internships. We do have paid internships in the house now. That was not always the case. When I was an intern, it was unpaid. But I would definitely encourage people, if you're interested, your member is the best person to reach out to just to learn more about what they do in general. And if you're interested, you can also intern oftentimes at the local level in the district as well. So there's a lot of options, but yeah, I think the best experience is the internship experience. You really get to learn a lot about constituent outreach and how people advocate. So I would encourage anyone who's interested, definitely reach out to your member, and Sarah can share my contact information if anyone has more questions about that too.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And thank you, David, for suggesting that. Yes, paid internships is definitely a new thing. That's great. It's all part of building this more equitable food system. So I just tweeted, I hope you did too. Feel free to retweet me at sbrown97. You can follow, I hope you're already following World Food Prize, Farm Journal Foundation, and Farm Bureau. Again, the World Food Prize hashtag is FoodPrize20, and our unique hashtag is Advocate WFP20. So we'll see if that gets around, but we really encourage you guys to use your voice. One last thing that is really important, and I'd say last but not least, is aside from advocating, is making sure that you are registered to vote. It's November 3rd is approaching, and it's so important to vote for all of your different elected officials. If you have not registered to vote, you can use a tool that we have at Farm Bureau. There's a lot of different tools that you're probably seeing everywhere, so make sure you are checking in your state. But one of our Farm Journal tools we have is this I Farm, I Vote page. You can look up and see if you have already registered to vote, and if not, it'll show you how to do that. There's still time. I know folks are already out voting today and in early voting, so we highly encourage that you get engaged in this important part of the process as well. So in the chat, we're going to add additional organizations that'll be great for you to follow. I know David suggested some, but there's a great list of different groups that if you're interested in learning more, aside from Farm Bureau, Farm Journal, highly recommend, if you care about these issues, checking out the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, the Lugar Center, APLU has a lot of great resources. These are all people that we collaborate together with in town on these issues. Specifically for global food security, check out Interaction, Bread for the World, the One Campaign, 1000 Days. You've probably read that book or heard about that for those of you that are on here. And there's a plethora of other organizations that you can check out, such as Save the Children Care, Mercy Court, etc. So we will put that in the chat, and when we email you all everything that we had posted today, we will include that as well. We have plenty of time to stick around and hang out. I'm really just so grateful that you all joined us for this discussion of a little refresh of how our democracy works and the policy areas that you should be focused on as you're thinking about everything being discussed this week at World Food Prize and the Borlaug Dialogue. Rest assured that there's a lot of great people like David and Andrew and Stephanie working on these issues here in Washington for you, but we really need your involvement and we need your voice. So our staff can hang out for a while and answer questions. If not, feel free to talk, reach out to us. But let's see, I'll look at the chat to see if we have any new questions that have come through. I see another endorsement for apples being their favorite. Andrew and David, also anything else you'd like to add? Or Stephanie, while we have you here?
Well, I've already voted, so that's that's good. We did mail-in balloting here in DC. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a crazy year, I think, for everything that's been going on. So it's really important to get your vote out there and make sure you get submit into a ballot box, and hopefully one that's authorized. And
we got a question. Let's see. Ooh, we got a couple questions. Okay. First one, how should the federal government invest in public plant breeding innovation, which depends on continued sustained funding on timescales ranging from 10 to 20 years for crop species? However, most current research grants last only 3 to 5 years. That's a great question, and something that a lot of people don't think about are those timescales. Andrew or David, do you have any thoughts there?
Well, I think one of the things is it's a really important point, and it's again kind of reflective of some of the problems and inefficiencies in policymaking. you talk to anyone in a federal agency, they're not going to want to give money for that long. It's just that's not how they do things. And, federal government has been running, programs a certain way for a long time. So it's difficult to kind of get out of that status quo. One project that we got to visit last year at the University of Illinois, so just kind of dropping another project, it's called RIPE, Realizing Inefficiency and Realizing Increasing Photosynthetic Efficiency. It's quite a mouthful. But it's a project that's being funded by lots of different groups. So it's not just, it's partly funded by the Gates Foundation, a few other donors, USAID, the UK aid organization. So I think one of the ways to kind of get at this is to really involve a multitude of other donors that have maybe longer time scales that they're working with. And then, or another totally different course of action is to really partner up with the private sector in terms of, what they're trying to do as well. I mean, there's plenty of common ground, I think, to think about some of the problems that we're trying to address. And so another organization that I would call attention to is the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, FAR. They primarily do public-private partnerships, and they leverage a lot of public funding, bringing in some of those private funders to increase the impact. So that's one thing I would recommend, is just to look at a diversity of funders to try to break out of that, the time constraint.
Thank you, David. FAR has a lot of great resources as well. I just put their website in the chat. So I have another question I'm a young person thinking, I've never given any money to a congressional candidate. Why would they care about my opinion? So maybe Stephanie or Andrew could answer this. This is Stephanie, so you nodding. Do you need to donate money for your representative to care about your opinion?
Absolutely not. Your representative is there to represent you. They're elected for a reason by the people. So vote with that in mind, but also, especially here in DC, we keep two different sides. We have the political side, which our campaign staff handles, and then the official side. I work entirely on the official side, and that has nothing to do with donations. That has nothing to do with anything else aside from the work that needs to be done on the constituents. So it's entirely separate. And you absolutely don't have to donate in order to make a difference. Just use your voice and use your vote, and definitely just be an advocate that way. You'd be surprised how much power that actually does hold, especially during these times. And I will say that also, as a young person, it's a lot easier to get the attention of your members of Congress as a young person sometimes than it is as an adult. And I learned that just being an advocate too in my own time. But if you have really unique stories about things that have been impactful to you, especially in college or even, in high school, share those stories with them, because they really do care about those, and they love hearing those often more than just kind of the normal stuff that they hear every single day.
Thanks, Stephanie.
And
that did actually, sorry, go ahead.
I'll expand on that, Sarah, just one quick. I mean, you're something that money shouldn't be able to buy, but can't buy, is that you're an actual constituent. You're a vote for that member, and they need you to stay in office. So they need to be, responsive to the needs of their constituents. They want to have you on their side if they want to stay in office, because obviously you're going to talk to your friends. And the other thing is that, you got to remember, working with your member of Congress, they're human at the end of the day. Yeah, they're a public servant, but, honey goes a lot further than, other methods of attracting things, right? And so being helpful to them, working with them, will obviously make them, like any other person, want to work with you more. So, and I think somebody made the point earlier, I think Stephanie's a fine representation of that. You didn't know their staff. I mean, the member of Congress is being pulled 1,000 different directions. Those that have personal relationships, that's great, but that's not necessarily something you have to aspire to. Just meeting that staff and getting a good relationship with that, because, in my job, I work probably more with staff than the members a lot of times. And if you have a great relationship, that member of Congress trusts their staff. And if that staff trusts you, you've got a very good conduit into that member's mind as well.
Thank you, Andrew. That's a great point. And one of the things that Stephanie was saying reminded me, when you're engaging specifically on social media, a lot, especially right now during campaign season, you might find two accounts. So you might find their campaign handle, and then you'll find their official account. So make sure if you're reaching out to their official account of business, Stephanie and her peers are checking that one, and they will make sure they'll get back to you. If it's the political campaign account, you might not get an answer. And so there's the staff that are working on those it's not the staff you're trying to target. So make sure it's the official account when it's election season, like right now.
Yeah, Sarah, one thing on that that's helpful is oftentimes the handle will include rep or senator or something if it's the official account. So you guys can just kind of keep a lookout for that, but they're all verified too. So be careful of any random accounts that you might be sending stuff to. Everybody has a blue check mark, and it'll usually tell you that they're a candidate or they're a sitting member, depending on who they are. So.
Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, one last question I see. Would my representative or staff, would they ever visit my family farm? I'd like to show them how we optimize production and respect the environment at the same time. Stephanie, do you guys ever respond to just general requests like that if they're not coming through an organization like ours, if they're just coming from
all of the time. That's one of the Congresswoman's favorite activities, especially in the fall. Apple picking in upstate New York is really fun. But yeah, I've actually had her on our family farm, and it's really interesting because that's the perfect opportunity for them to learn exactly what is happening. And they really are curious. I think most members, and Congressman Medici is also very good about getting out there and reaching out to farmers and just kind of walking around and listening to them, because you don't really understand always what the impact of funding is until you see it and you see what farmers are doing every single day. So definitely reach out to staff. I would say also reach out to district staff at that level. They often make recommendations of things that the representatives should do, and we're always looking for really good farm tours, and oftentimes you can get kind of a contingency of local elected officials as well to come out and learn about everything all at once. So that's always an option, and it's great to show them firsthand what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And again, all the contact information for the different offices, so your local office and here in DC, are all at their website, which will be on house.gov. So, and the same for your senators. So thank you so much.
Sarah, there are multiple questions in the Q&A that were not addressed. If you would like to click on those.
I'm looking at the wrong box. Let's see, I'm in the chat. Perfect. Okay, we have one question. Let's see, there's some great ones in here. For students in high school, what are some opportunities you know of to get involved or have internships to grow knowledge of food insecurity? David, I see you nodding. I don't have as much experience with high school internships, so, but David, I might let you jump in since it looks like.
I don't either. I thought that was a good question. I'm the wrong person to ask about high school.
Well, I would say, I mean, once again, every county is represented by a county farm bureau. So, I mean, there's an opportunity there to maybe make a connection when you're talking about food, what might be available in your area. A lot of our county farm bureaus work with, local food banks as well. But I think, FFA and 4-H, if your high school doesn't have FFA, your county does have 4-H, or at least they should have some form of it. Those are two opportunities to meet some people in the ag community. With that, usually your 4-H is through your extension service. And so that would be another gateway to your land grants that your extension agent can connect you to that researcher or to that department on campus to hopefully spark some interest in that high schooler, especially if they're not sure, what they want to study in school, they have that ability to have some exposure. And then obviously, if you're fortunate enough to go to college, I mean, there's tons of internships from the Hill to organizations like ours to, all types of government internships, everything in between. So there's plenty of opportunities. I think it's a little bit more limited in high school, but I think there's a lot of local resources that you can start tapping into to get that exposure and start building those relationships as that student, as you get older.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Andrew. I'm sorry. That's fabulous. And I'd highly recommend also check out a program called Close Up. And Close Up brings high school students to DC. That's when I first got bit by the bug of wanting to come to Washington, which then led me to interning on the Hill in college. And now I'm here for Farm Bureau. So check out Close Up. But I agree, talk to your local extension office, 4-H, FFA. Those are great places to start. And also your county Farm Bureau office, and they can help point you in the right direction. And one other thing to note, I see Andrew wants to say something here too.
I'd make clear local food banks. I mean, you look at everything that's
Yes,
going on
thank
now.
you.
They're looking for help from donations to just volunteer time. I think I glossed over that, but that's another probably great resource for folks to get involved with. And heck, you probably need community service hours as a high schooler too, and that's a great way to get those as well.
Andrew, that's such a great point. Thank you so much. And I see Rose put that in the chat. That is great. And one other thing, you know, oftentimes people are looking for formal programs, and you can always just reach out and email organizations and ask. And again, a good place to start, of maybe if you don't know where to start, ask your state or county farm bureau, email their staff, or again, your local chapters of these different volunteer organizations, just email them. There's externships, which are short mini internships that where you shadow someone for a day or a week or a couple of weeks. And so don't ever hesitate to ask, and maybe even your local congressman or woman's office, they'd be open to having you come shadow them, even if they don't have a formal program for high schoolers. So never hurts to ask. Well, thank you, everyone. We're about at our time limit, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. But if you have more questions, don't hesitate to contact us. We just really appreciate your engagement and your involvement, and for being a part of all of the discussions this week. I hate that we can't see all of your faces, but really glad that we could connect with you here today. All right, well, thank you to our fellow panelists and guests, and we hope to see you all soon.
Take care.